You got to get scared that people who are not criminals are getting like lassoed up and deported. That's the thing about politics, right? Never admit your fault. Never admit you're wrong.
It's so dumb.
And this is the thing we're seeing with the signal thing, and this is the thing we're seeing with this.
It's one of the worst places on earth, that prison. I can't imagine what they're doing to him. Every day that goes by is a travesty. Get him out of there.
You got to get scared that people who are not criminals are getting like lassoed up and deported and sent to like El Salvador prisons.
With a bunch of these Tren de Aragua guys, allegedly they got one guy who, at least one guy who wasn't a criminal, who was just a gay barber who I think, according to the story, came here legally. He was here legally. That's what they said.
Joe Rogan and Konstantin Kisin weighed in on the wrongful deportation of a Venezuelan migrant who was sent to a maximum security prison in El Salvador, with ICE claiming that he was a member of Tren de Aragua. However, it appears that is not the case. In fact, he wasn't even in the United States illegally. He was here legally. He had a legitimate asylum claim. He came in through a port of entry and made that asylum claim. And his name's André Hernandez. He's a gay makeup artist who's been an outspoken critic of Venezuela. And I just feel like it's pretty obvious he's not a Tren de Aragua gang member.
Yeah, they don't even allow gay people into the gang. So among 1,000 reasons why he's not a gang member. So this is what happens when you don't do due process.
Exactly.
Because the courts are supposed to check. Oh, is he a gang member or isn't he? Oh, is he undocumented or isn't he? Did he come here legally or not? Because if you don't check, you get people who did come here legally and that aren't in a gang. And that's why, like, if he did this without doing it in a dumb way, and he just rounded up the actual gang and made sure, then shipped him off, some people would still be mad that he's sending him to a hellhole in El Salvador. But overall, the American people would be massively on his side.
Yeah, and look, I want to be 100% clear. Everyone, including individuals who are suspected of being gang members, and there's actual evidence, showing that they're part, doesn't matter. You need to go through the proper channels. There needs to be due process. There's a reason why due process exists. And if you think it's okay to just throw it away when it comes to individuals who the federal government is simply accusing unilaterally of doing something criminal, well, I mean, you're really allowing so much power to be concentrated in the federal government to the point where they can accuse anyone of anything. And you don't get your day in court. That's crazy. That is absolutely insane. And I'm really happy that people are waking up to how insane that really is. Now, in this case, we're talking about a Venezuelan migrant who made a legitimate asylum claim through the proper channels. He was in the country legally. He's sent to El Salvador, meaning a third country, to a detention facility for hardened criminals and terrorists. That's CCOT. That's insane. Now, he had sought asylum in the United States through a port of entry, but the Trump administration argues that he's part of Tren de Aragua because he has gang tattoos. Oh, interesting. So, they make the claim. I want to see the gang tattoos. Maybe they have a legitimate argument here. Here's what the tattoos look like. Here are the tattoos that ICE declared were evidence that this guy, gay makeup artist who came to a port of entry seeking asylum from Venezuela, was a member of a vicious gang. I'm not making this up, this is it. Mom and dad with crowns over them. Those are not gang tattoos. But apparently it didn't matter because despite the fact that it's obvious those aren't gang tattoos, his lawyers have not been able to reach him since March 15th. And after interviewing him, he says he is not a member of the gang. Somehow an ICE officer concludes that despite all that, his 2 crown tattoos and mom and dad written under them are consistent with those of a Tren de Aragua member.
No, they're not.
No, they're not. They're just lying. So with that context in mind, and knowing that this is what Rogan and Kisin are talking about, let's hear more of what they had to say.
I think a human being plucked out of nowhere and ending up in a country he's never been in a maximum security prison with gang members, seems like a bad thing to happen to me.
It's horrific. It's horrific.
I don't think that should be controversial.
No, that's not controversial at all. And this is the thing, measured twice, cut once. This is kind of crazy that could be possible. That's horrific, and that's bad for the cause. Like, the cause is, let's get the gang members out. Everybody agrees, but let's not innocent gay hairdressers get lumped up with the gangs, and then, like, how long before that guy can get out? Like, can we figure out how to get him out? Is there any plan in place to alert the authorities that they've made a horrible mistake and correct it?
Well, if you think about it from a government perspective, and this is where I think it gets quite sinister, is once you've done that, the incentive structure is never going to be to admit that and deal with it. The incentive structure is to say nothing, to cover it up, to pretend it didn't happen.
But
right?
that is horrible.
So someone ends up in a black hole. But we've seen it. We've seen it in every country, including in America.
But that's the thing about politics, right? Never admit your fault. Never admit you're wrong.
It's so dumb.
And this is the thing we're seeing with the signal thing, and this is the thing we're seeing with this.
And there seems to be more frustration with the lack of accountability or the willingness to take responsibility for mistakes made. So far, we haven't heard anything from the Trump administration in regard to this specific individual who was sent away. But you should know that we have so far spent about $40 million to send migrants to El Salvador's CICOT. And that's according to the State Department. They apparently did an analysis and provided that analysis to senators. There was a delegation of 5 senators who even visited. I'm sorry, that's for Gitmo. So we've spent $40 million to jail 400 migrants at Guantanamo Bay. So it's not just El Salvador. We're also sending them to Guantanamo Bay, but that has become so expensive that the Trump administration quietly stopped doing that. And they actually sent about half of those 400 migrants back to the United States because of how costly it was. But I should also note that we've been paying El Salvador as well. The last time it was reported, we spent about $6 million to send migrants there. And now a federal judge has stepped in to do an emergency order to temporarily block what the Trump administration is doing. So this federal judge has issued the ruling saying that, listen, you can't do this without due process. Okay, so we're gonna do a temporary block. This is federal judge, US District Judge Brian Murphy. He's based in Boston, and he stated that the Trump administration must give those they want to deport a meaningful opportunity to seek humanitarian protection in the US. And Murphy wrote that officials may not deport someone to a so-called third country unless and until they provide the deportee and their lawyer written notice of the country to which they are being sent. Then the judge said officials must let them apply in immigration court for protection to stay in the US under the Convention Against Torture, which Congress ratified back in 1994. And then after that, the judge said the agency must await a final decision from an immigration judge. That's when the due process comes in.
Yeah, so 2 really positive developments there, because what are we most worried about in the Trump years? That they're gonna be lawless, right? So if Trump serves 4 years, creates a giant mess, but at the end of the day, we get back to America, there's elections and Democrats can win, Republicans can win, and et cetera, then it's all good, right? So like the 4 years will be terrible, but that's the consequence of elections, so we gotta work harder to win, et cetera, right? So one, the courts hold up today. That's what just happened, what Anna just read you, right? So they say, no, you can't go without due process. You got to check with us first. Let's hope that Trump administration listens to the courts. So great, courts are holding so far. Then number 2, I was led to believe that the entire brosphere, Joe Rogan, et cetera, were all Trump cultists and would never disagree with him and would never hold him accountable. Now it looks like they were holding him accountable. Okay, and that's not just Rogan, a constant kissing. So he's a guy who's on the right. I went on a show, we had a big debate, funny enough, about transgender girls in high school sports. I said they should be in high school sports, he said they shouldn't, and we had a big debate about that, but he's a free speech advocate. And I was like, well, let's see. When Trump gets into office, we'll see if you're a real free speech advocate. And look at that. Turns out, like here he is. This is not about free speech as much, it's more about don't send an innocent man to a jail in a foreign government, a foreign country where they're going to torture him.
It's about the fundamental right of due process.
Yes, but human rights, rights. So he stands up for him. Great job, Constantine, nice job, we appreciate it. Rogan stands up for it, calls it horrific, says it shouldn't even be controversial, it's clearly wrong. Now, it is controversial, there are MAGA guys who are totally like, oh, whatever, they're not citizens, who cares? We don't know, maybe he came in here illegally, oh, I trust Trump. Okay, that also exists, right? But here is independent media outlets and personalities going, no, not on our watch. This is wrong. Now, I said that online and some people responded, not good enough. He has to apologize to all non-Trump.
Okay, whatever, who cares about that? But like, look, let's get back to the actual political analysis here, because the one area where Trump is still doing well, the one area where he's not pulling underwater is immigration. But if more and more stories like this come out, if more and more of his supporters start speaking out against what his administration is doing with immigration, it will not bode well for Trump or the Republicans. And just to give you the latest numbers, according to the latest CBS YouGov poll on the topic of immigration, about 53% of Americans approve of what the Trump administration is doing and 47% disapprove. He's underwater in every other area, including the economy. And so that's something for him to keep in mind. You know, he thinks he's killing it with immigration, but if you make these massive mistakes and people, innocent people like this, makeup artist, this gay makeup artist who spoke out against Venezuela and had a legitimate claim, asylum claim, gets shipped off to a detention facility for hardened criminals, gang members, and terrorists, people are gonna start turning on you.
Okay, last two things. Look, I would hope that even if you're on the right, that you would say, hey, it's one thing to send off guilty people to that hellhole in El Salvador. It's another thing to send off an innocent guy there.
Right.
Please tell me you think that. Okay, I think all decent people should agree to that. And I'm thrilled to see Rogan and Kissinger agree on that as well. And then finally, to Anna's point, and what we're all saying here, which is, look guys, there's still significant issues about why not just send them back to their home country? Why pay a foreign government? Some of our members wrote in about that too. A foreign government to basically torture them there. So those are all legitimate questions. But if you're on the right, Anna's totally right. This is gonna make your position totally unpopular. In fact, I think Rogan said it too. So why are you being counterproductive? It doesn't make any sense. Now, on the left, they said there was no tren de Aragua. The rest of them are tren de Aragua. So I know that they weren't in Aurora, Colorado, according to some folks, okay? But they are. Now, most important thing, get him out of there right now. Look, guys, number one, he's innocent. He's not a gang member. He has no one to protect him, and he's gay. Get him out of there. What are we doing?
Yeah, and he didn't enter the country illegally. He entered the country through a legitimate port of entry. He had a legitimate asylum claim. He didn't come here for economic reasons. He's been speaking out against the government of Venezuela and is worried about being persecuted.
That's one of the worst places on earth, that prison. Yeah. I can't imagine what they're doing to him. Every day that goes by is a travesty. Get him out of there. And so we'll see if there's anyone in the Trump administration who will listen to anyone, or if they'll just go careening out of control as they have been from day one.
Here at CCOT today and visiting this facility. And first of all, I want to thank El Salvador and their president for their partnership with the United States of America to bring our terrorists here and to incarcerate them and have consequences for the violence that they have perpetuated in our communities. I also want everybody to know, if you come to our country illegally, this is one of the consequences you could face. First of all, do not come to our country illegally. You will be removed and you will be prosecuted. But know that this facility is one of the tools in our toolkit that we will use if you commit crimes against the American people.
Well, there you have Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem using actual human beings as a prop for her cute little video there. She's in El Salvador. She is showing off the detention facility for terrorists that immigrants have been sent to by the Trump administration. And now she's threatening to send even more immigrants there, presumably with no due process or even proof that these people are even criminals. Now, look, there are two things happening here, and I don't want anyone to conflate the two. The right would argue anyone who enters the country illegally is a criminal and we should treat them all the same. I disagree with that entirely, okay? Now, I want to separate people who might have entered the country illegally, okay, from those who also did the same, but on top of that, are part of gangs, are committing violent crimes and all that stuff. I know there are people on the far left who think you shouldn't even do that differentiation. Everyone should be allowed to stay. I disagree entirely. You can be upset about that if you'd like, okay? Now, here's the thing though. If you're gonna try to justify deporting Venezuelan migrants to another country, not Venezuela, to El Salvador. And your whole argument is, well, these are dangerous, violent criminals. That should be adjudicated by the courts. Because if you create a situation in which it is okay for the executive branch to just unilaterally point at anyone and accuse them of anything, and without any due process, they are punished for it, that's what I call big government, my friends. Government doesn't get any bigger than that. And it's something that deteriorates the rights of everyone. Due process is super important. Because if you create this situation now under Trump, and for anyone on the right who might be watching this, if you think that's okay because you like Trump, you agree with everything Trump's doing, well, I mean, that sets a precedent for a Democratic president to come in. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't want a Democratic president or members of that president's cabinet to point at people that might be on your side and say, they're engaging in criminality. I'm going to punish them. No due process. First of all, I'd be furious about that because whether someone holds ideas or political views that differ from mine doesn't matter. At the end of the day, the bigger picture is the importance of protecting our rights and not allowing anyone in government to unilaterally decide whether or not we are guilty of something. We have a whole system of government, a whole system of checks and balances. A judge needs to weigh in and adjudicate. You need evidence of wrongdoing. You need evidence that a crime is committed. And that brings us to this unbelievably disgusting story involving one of the migrants who was sent to this facility for terrorists in El Salvador, just simply based on a tattoo that the Trump administration mistook for a Tren de Aragua tattoo. In reality, it was the symbol representing autism awareness. So, thanks to new reporting, we have this shocking example of how ICE and Homeland Security snatched this Venezuelan migrant who likely had nothing to do with gangs, nothing to do with violent criminality, simply because of their tattoos. One of the men included on the list of deportees is Neri Alvarado Borges. And according to Mother Jones, he may have been targeted because of an autism awareness tattoo. Now, Alvarado lived in a small city in northern Venezuela before coming to the United States in late 2023. His father is a farmer and his mother supports his 15-year-old brother, Nelly Nellerson. So here's a photo. Here's Neri with his brother. So Alvarado's older sister Maria insists that her brother has absolutely no connection to Tren de Aragua, and that should be adjudicated through our courts. But the Trump administration doesn't believe in due process, and unfortunately, there's so much hatred toward immigrants in this country that people are willing to sacrifice their own rights. They're willing to sacrifice due process in order to get rid of these people, even if there's no evidence that they're part of Tren de Aragua at all. So she also said that he used to teach swimming classes for children with developmental disabilities. Wow, real threat to the country. So let's take a look at the tattoo. This is the tattoo in question. Anyone who confuses this for a gang tattoo is a literal moron, okay? And should probably go to like continuation school because their high school diploma means nothing. Like if you're not able to determine that that is not a gang tattoo, there's something wrong with you. Now, Maria says anyone who's talked to Neri for even an hour can tell you what a great person he is. Truly, as a family, we are completely devastated to see him going through something so unjust, especially knowing that he's never done anything wrong. He's someone who, as they say, wouldn't even hurt a fly. And by the way, guys, the detention facility that this man was sent to is it's full to the brim of actual violent criminals. It is literally a detention facility for terrorists in El Salvador. So do you really think that someone who simply entered the country illegally, I get it, people don't like that, I get it. But do you think that that is enough to put that person in a prison cell in El Salvador that is meant for terrorists and violent, hardened criminals? Nonetheless, according to the report, Alvarado was detained by ICE outside his apartment in early February and brought in for questioning. Juan Enrique Hernandez, the owner of 2 Venezuelan bakeries in the Dallas area, and Alvarado's boss, told Mother Jones. One day later, Hernandez went to see him in detention. Alvarado told Hernandez that an ICE agent had asked him if he knew why he had been picked up. Alvarado said he did not know. Well, you're here because of your tattoos, the ICE agent replied, according to Hernandez. We're finding and questioning everyone who has tattoos. Okay. Apparently, we have ICE agents who are morons and can't differentiate between gang tattoos and an autism awareness tattoo. According to both Hernandez and Maria Alvarado, the ICE agent told Neary, "You're clean. I'm going to put down here that you have nothing to do with Tren de Aragua." But for some unknown reason, another official in ICE's Dallas field office decided to, keep Alvarado detained anyway. And so shortly before he was sent to El Salvador, Neary reportedly told Hernandez, "There are 90 of us here. We all have tattoos. We were all detained for the same reasons. From what they told me, we are going to be deported." So they assumed that meant he'd be deported to, Venezuela. That's where he's from, not El Salvador. Now, there are some issues right now with Venezuela because they're refusing to take their own citizens back. And so that led to an issue for the Trump administration. Well, what do we do with these migrants? And that's when they made the deal to pay El Salvador $6 million in US taxpayer money to detain undocumented immigrants from our country in their prison system, in this facility that was built for terrorists and hardened violent criminals. By the way, man, Venezuela, what a joke. Seriously, you're not gonna take your own people back. You're gonna acknowledge that this is what Trump is gonna do with them, and you're totally fine with it. Okay, absolute garbage. So sadly, it's not just Neary. So Mother Jones spoke to the friends and family members of 9 other men who believe that they were also sent to CCOT, that's the facility in El Salvador, because of their tattoos. All of them say that their loved ones had no connection to gangs whatsoever, and many provided documented evidence that they had no criminal record, even in Venezuela. But the government is defiant because, of course, and look, let's just talk about the political motivations here, okay? Because I think that's what's driving this more than anything. Trump is starting to see a pretty significant decline in his approval ratings, especially on specific issues like the economy, for obvious reasons. But the one area where Trump is still polling pretty well among the American people is immigration. And so he's going to emphasize his immigration policies. He's going to double down. And in fact, recently he was frustrated because you can't just do mass deportation without the resources necessary to do it. You need Congress to pass legislation and fund the agenda that you want to carry out. But Trump knows that's not going to happen. Okay, so he's been frustrated by that. And now it's just anyone that I can deport, anyone that gets caught up in this whole mess, I don't care. We're not gonna make any apologies for it. We're not going to look back and say, hey, we made mistakes. We're just gonna keep going because this is the one area where Trump seems to be pretty popular. Now, will he continue to be popular in this area when you hear stories of American citizens who accidentally got rounded up? When you hear stories of migrants who may have entered the country illegally but haven't done anything wrong other than that, haven't joined a gang, haven't committed violent crimes, are Americans going to be cool with more and more stories like this coming out? I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. I keep getting surprised by the things that end up being popular these days. But I guess we're going to have to wait and see. I find this to be incredibly unjust, again, because of the lack of due process, because of the fact that someone who merely entered the country illegally is now stuck in a prison cell that was meant for terrorists and violent criminals. So, as I mentioned, the government is defiant. Robert Cerna, an acting field office director for ICE's removal operations branch, said the agency did not simply rely on social media posts, photographs of the alien displaying gang-related hand gestures or tattoos alone. Oh, okay, great. So what did you rely on? Well, he acknowledged that many of the Venezuelans Trump deported under the Alien Enemies Act had no criminal histories in the United States. Oh, wow, what an admission. Okay, great. But he did twist that fact to justify the deportations without due process. And again, that's the important thing here. The lack of due process. The lack of a criminal record does not indicate they pose a limited threat. In fact, based upon their association with TDA, by the way, who determines that they have an association with TDA? Just anyone in the Trump administration can make that point, and we're just going to believe it without any evidence? Okay, yeah. The lack of specific information about each individual actually highlights the risk they pose. It demonstrates that they are terrorists with regard to whom we lack a complete profile. Okay, just let that sink in. We don't have any record of any wrongdoing, but that could mean we just don't know. And this person could actually be really dangerous. We just don't have a record. That is such a crazy thing to say. I mean, it could demonstrate that you have no proof that they're guilty of committing the crimes that you've accused them for and have used as justification for their deportation. The Justice Department said in a court filing Monday that it was exercising what's commonly called the state secrets privilege in the case because sharing the information would harm diplomatic relations and national security. So they're reaching for anything. We have the evidence, but we don't want to share it publicly because national security threat. It might ruin our relationship with our allies. Okay, right. But to be fair, Donald Trump, well known for wanting to maintain America's relationship with its allies. Okay. And even though the administration is facing lawsuits over their use of the Alien Enemies Act to deport immigrants with no due process, the privilege allows the US government to withhold sensitive information such as intelligence sources and methods and foreign affairs details from becoming public as part of a court case. So that's the excuse that they're using. I don't know if that's going to really pass the smell test through these lawsuits that have been filed against the Trump administration. As we know, Judge James Boasberg has been trying to determine whether the Trump administration violated his order to halt or turn around the deportation flights to El Salvador. He wanted to know when the planes took off and landed and how many people were aboard those flights. But Pam Bondi, Marco Rubio, and Kristi Noem claimed to the judge that releasing information about the flights could compromise law enforcement methods. Obviously, it's just a flat out lie. So Ashley Deeks, a law professor who teaches classes on national security, makes this argument. The Trump administration's use of the privilege in the Venezuelans case was noteworthy because it wasn't in response to a request for information from the opposing attorneys, but rather from the judge himself. So look, honestly, what happens next really isn't clear. I have no idea. But to make myself abundantly clear, if our executive branch is going to be allowed to just simply accuse anyone of anything with no due process, this country, our constitutional rights are being dismantled right before our very eyes. And yes, constitutional rights are extended to people who are in the country illegally. This has been adjudicated by the Supreme Court over and over again. Even if you're an undocumented immigrant in the United States of America, you are still protected by the First Amendment, freedom of speech. You still have rights, including the right to due process. And these individuals who were accused of being members of Tren de Aragua never got their day in court, never had anything looked at by a judge. They got rounded up by members of ICE at the direction of the Trump administration. And without any evidence being provided, without any proof, they got accused of being gang members and violent individuals who pose a threat to our national security, and they got deported to a place where actual violent people and terrorists are being detained. It's sick. It really is. It's sick. Now, you want to make an argument for deporting people who are here illegally? Okay, let's have that conversation. Let's have that debate. Let's have that argument. But to make things up about people, to paint them as violent, dangerous individuals and not prove it at all is a huge problem for me. And it should be a huge problem for the rest of the country, especially those who purport to care about constitutional rights whenever their least favorite politicians are in charge. You got to be consistent. You either care about our Constitution or you don't, period. And I see a lot of hypocritical behavior going on right now on the right as they're aiding and abetting this nonsense that could turn around and bite them in the ass. Remember, Americans overwhelmingly supported the Patriot Act, which violated their own civil liberties because they were so scared after 9/11. And then when all was said and done, they realized, man, we effed up. We allowed the government to scare us into essentially giving away our rights. And honestly, we're letting it happen again.
You can't take away people's due process like that. And I don't trust the El Salvadorian government to be making sure that they are not torturing people, that they're vetting them properly. They need to be vetted on this side.
Why do the Democrats always say this could happen?
It did happen. It didn't could
They're
happen.
torturing them?
Did you watch the video?
I don't think she did, because Jessica Tarloff is absolutely right. It did happen. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more stories involving individuals who were actually in the United States legally, were not part of any type of Venezuelan gang, but unfortunately were rounded up by ICE and sent to a terrorist detention facility that also, by the way, imprisons hardened criminals and gang members in El Salvador. It's known as CCOT. We've been talking about it, but there's actually a little bit of good news today, because I always want to know, where do the majority of Americans stand on this issue? Now, Trump is still polling well on immigration. It's actually the one area where he is not underwater. 53% of Americans, according to a recent CBS poll, are still liking what Trump is doing in regard to immigration. But those numbers could really take a hit. And this should be a warning to Trump. This poll result should be a warning to Trump, because according to a new poll that was just put out by YouGov, it seems that most Americans actually agree with Fox News host Jessica Tarloff and believe that deporting migrants without due process should not be allowed. And by the way, according to our Supreme Court on multiple occasions, it isn't allowed, okay? Even people who are in the country illegally are protected by our constitutional rights, including the right to due process. But the people we're talking about aren't even in the country illegally, but they got rounded up by ICE anyway. Anyway, so the poll was conducted between March 28th and April 1st, and here's what they found. Deporting immigrants without criminal convictions to El Salvador to be imprisoned without letting them challenge the deportation in court. That was what the basis of this survey was about, right? And here are the results. Only 15% of these respondents said that they strongly support, and 11% say they somewhat support, for a total of 26% supporting the move by the Trump administration to some degree. 26% is still a little too high in my eyes, but it's minuscule. It's minuscule when you think about how things seem online versus how most Americans are feeling. Most Americans want due process, because I'm gonna assume they're smart enough to understand, it is the moral thing to do, it's the ethical thing to do, the constitutional thing to do, but more importantly, when you start cheerleading for the erosion of rights for others, you would be mistaken to think that it's not gonna come back to haunt you or someone you love, someone you know. You have to protect due process. These types of rights help set countries like the United States apart from other countries that we do not in any way favor, wouldn't wanna live in, because there's too much government power and people don't have the right to defend themselves when they're accused of something they maybe didn't do, right? So, in the case of these migrants, we're talking about one guy who was here legally. He had protected status in the United States, but he got rounded up anyway. Now, how would you prove that you have protected status? Well, you would do it through the courts. A judge would weigh in, a judge would adjudicate based on the evidence that's presented. But when you rip due process away, that individual doesn't even have the ability to provide evidence to say, no, I'm not here illegally. I am here legally, here's my protected status. There's no evidence of me being in a gang. So let's get to some more of the results here. On the flip side, 46% said they strongly oppose and 15% say they somewhat oppose, meaning 61% of respondents are against the deportations and indefinite imprisonments. 13% of respondents say that they're unsure of how they feel. So look, we can break things down even further by party affiliation. 32% of Republicans strongly support, along with 1% of Democrats and 13% of independents who strongly support the idea of deporting these migrants or these individuals without due process. I can't believe there's even 1% of Democrats who would want this. But 78% of Democrats say, no, you need due process. 45% of independents say the same. And 78% of Democrats strongly oppose of what Trump is doing in ripping due process away from this entire situation. 45% of independents feel the same way, and so do 18% of Republicans. Now, basically, Americans overall oppose the idea of deporting people without due process to El Salvador specifically, and they oppose it by a more than 2-to-1 margin. So look, there's a lot of humanity left in the country. I mean, you wouldn't think it based on what you see online or the doom and gloom that you see in the news day in and day out. But let's go to Jesse Waters now, because I guess we're gonna follow up this good news with Jesse Waters. Let's watch.
Time magazine was there when the gay barber from Venezuela who had a crown tattoo that said mom was being processed coming into the El Salvadorian. Oh, am I boring you again? I'm sorry.
No, but you've been talking about this gay barber from El Salvador with some stupid tattoo for weeks. Weeks, Jessica.
Come on.
It's just a gay barber.
He's not into you.
He's an innocent guy who got swept up in a deportation, and hopefully we get it figured out and straightened out. But a lot of people in this country, Jessica, get arrested for things that they didn't do, get falsely accused, falsely convicted.
I'm also against racial profiling.
That doesn't mean you just stop arresting people. That doesn't mean you stop arresting criminals because one guy was arrested who was innocent. It just means you just try to do it better the next time. And I have nothing against the gay barbers. Gay barbers usually give the best haircuts.
Okay. All right, Jesse. So look, this isn't about, we're gonna stop deporting people. That's what look, let's keep it real. He just doesn't want any mention of anything that makes the Trump administration look bad on the one thing Trump is still polling well on. That's what's really at the heart of Jesse Waters being super annoyed with Tarloff bringing this issue up. But this isn't about whether or not you deport individuals who are here illegally or individuals who are here illegally and are committing other crimes. This is about due process. Sending an innocent guy, especially a gay barber or a gay makeup artist, to El Salvador, specifically to that facility, is one of the worst things you could possibly do. That guy can get really hurt. I mean, he's acting like he's being, put in some like vacation, like a resort community or something for the time being. And like, yeah, we'll fix it, we'll get him back. No, he's being sent or has been sent to an awful place where it's difficult for his lawyers to get in touch with him. And there was no due process, which is, by the way, a process put in place to prevent these types of mistakes from happening. I remember the day when Republicans at least pretended they cared about constitutional rights. And by the way, clearly when it comes to American voters, Republican voters, a huge portion of them still do care about those constitutional rights. But you wouldn't think it based on the comments you hear from conservative media figures or even from members of Trump's administration. If you've made a mistake, fess up to it, apologize for it, and talk about how it's not gonna happen again and what you're gonna do to prevent it from happening again. I would venture to say that you would point to the importance of due process. But that's the thing, God forbid you have any politicians in the US that ever take any responsibility for the mistakes they made. All they do is they gaslight, hoping the American people are too dumb to realize what's going on. Democrats did it in the lead up to the 2024 presidential election. You saw how that worked out for them. Now the Trump administration is doing it. So we'll see how it plays out regarding the poll numbers in just a few months. But he's wasting a lot of goodwill by refusing to give people what they are entitled to, and that is due process.
Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true, but it does keep you updated on our live shows.